Hello, my good pals that like Umbraco CMS. My name is John, and in this video, I'm going to be doing a deep dive into Umbraco content. Yes, when you use Umbraco v9 as a CMS, there's two categories of content that you need to be aware of. So we have the published content and we have normal content. And if you want to master this amazing CMS, it's very important that you understand these different types of content, why they exist, and what you can do with each one. So specifically in this video, you're going to learn about why we have these two different types of content, the capabilities that each type of content can provide, so where you can use each type, the APIs required so you can access and query the CMS, save content, all that sort of stuff. Now, the reason why we're going into a deep dive in this video in particular is we're in the middle of a season of how to create a kick-ass website with Umbraco v9. So we're in the middle of a mini project if you haven't come across these videos before. So the aim of this mini project is to create a back-end screen that content editors can log in, and then in this screen they're going to be able to see all the saved and unpublished pages, the scheduled pages, so in one little screen. So as soon as they log into CMS, they can quickly and easily find the content that they need to edit. Now, this plugin sounds easy to build. However, to understand how to create a lot of these things, you need to understand things like, the search index, how to create backend plugins. You need to understand the difference between published content and non-published content, and you need to understand things like notifications. So if you want to learn more about these advanced Umbraco topics, remember, smash the subscribe button and be an absolute Umbraco badass legend. So, smash it. So assuming you've done that, let's start looking at the difference between this iPublished content and the iContent. In order to build a website using Umbraco CMS, you're going to need to be able to create content. So content editors is going to come into the back end using the document types that you've supplied. They're going to come in, generate some content. Now, when they're happy that the content has all the data and looks the way they want it to look, they're going to come over to this big green save and publish button that you can see right here, and they're going to publish their content. Now, in Umbraco CMS, you can tell when something has been published because this link property here will have a value. So let's say we go to the search page, you can see that this has got the URL segment or slug of the page. Now, when you publish something in Umbraco, two things happen in the back end which you might not be aware of. So the first thing which will happen, or one thing, is that the page will get added into the Lucene search index. So if you want to do a website search or you want to search your content in the front end, Umbraco gives you an out-of-the-box feature called Examine, which will allow you to do search queries. So as soon as you click publish, an entry is basically going to get added into this front end index, which is called external index. Now, as well as this, what's going to happen is a version of the page is going to be added into the Umbraco front-end cache. Now, this front-end cache is used by the Umbraco APIs. So when you're writing your code using the Umbraco APIs, it's going to be really quick. So instead of calling the API calls the database, and obviously making a request to the database takes loads of time. If you smash the database too much or hammer it too much, it's going to be really slow, affecting performance. So having this front-end cache and having the APIs talk to a cache rather than a database is really good for us because it's really quick. Now, one of the fundamental things about this front-end cache is that it's read-only. So when you start accessing content which is published content only, you're not going to be able to do any write operations or modify operations, that sort of stuff. So obviously, if you're just querying the CMS and rendering some data in HTML, that's fine and dandy. You don't need to save content in code. Now, when you start creating things like backend plugins, or maybe some really bespoke plugins, something like that, you might want to update content, or you might need to start querying content in Umbraco that hasn't been published. So as you can see in the content tree here, we've got all these pages which are in a dark grey rather than black. And these pages are all pages which have been saved and not published yet. So we can prove that by going to info, and you can see here we've got this nice little warning. This item is not published. So if you start using the Umbraco API, you're not going to get some of these contents, especially content which has been saved and not scheduled. So that's all content you can't get using the normal iPublished content, the normal Umbraco APIs, which kind of makes sense. It hasn't been published. It's not in that front-end cache. So let's say we want to create a front end screen like this unpublished tutorials one. So this is a custom screen that I've created, and in here I've got a list of all the scheduled and saved pages in Umbraco that hasn't been published. So as you can see here, we've got no saved, saved, I don't want to say, it's there, and all of these are appearing in my list. And you can see that we have the by the way, something of less, blog listing, search. All of these pages are published and they don't appear in this list. So in order to generate this type of list, I have to use the content API. Or the other way of using it or accessing it is I can access things through this internal index. So there's a big difference between published content and non-published content. So if you want to create these bespoke backend plugins, it's likely that you're going to need to work with this iContent type of content. So hoping that makes sense to you. So now we know the different types of content and where we should use them, we're going to look at the different APIs that you can use to actually query them and the different properties on each type of content. We are inside a class called Search Service. And if you saw my previous video, you'll have seen this class before. So this is used to create a basic search within Umbraco. Now, the important thing in this class is that I'm accessing content in two different ways. So as you can see right here, we've got this Umbraco context accessor, and we also have this iContent service. And these are basically a good sort of side-by-side comparison of how you access the different types of content within CMS. So the Umbraco context accessor is the way that we access this published content, and the iContent service is how we work with types of iContent. So let's have a look at these two things in action and see the differences between them. So when we're using the content service and the normal service, you can see that we both have access to things like get by ID. And this is why when you're first using Umbraco, it can be tricky to understand which API you use. I will hold my hand up high that the first time that I built a site, I used the content service and I made everything iContent, and it all worked absolutely amazingly on my development laptop. And because it was a project for a small client, as soon as I released it to the world, the website completely fell over because the database got hammered too much. So understanding this stuff is important, and you know, there's silly people like me out there who use the wrong API. Now, one of the important things to understand about the content service is it's going to give you access to everything in Umbraco. So let's have a look at some of the things. So as you can see from this list, hopefully it's very small and very tiny on your screen, we have access to a load of things. However, we have access to methods like save and publish and branch. My favorite one, save blueprint, because it sounds cool. And we also have stuff like, you know, send to publication, set permissions. So we have loads and loads of options. Another interesting thing which is worth mentioning is we also have some methods called get version IDs, and get versions. So when we're working with content, you can see that we have access to a lot of capabilities within CMS. So we can update content, we can access content which hasn't been published, we can access previous versions of any bit of content, we can set permissions on it. Now let's take a look at the iContext service. So below, we're working with the iPublished content here. So if I look in here, you can see that there's, well, you might be able to see, there's definitely less options available. And then say from our front end content cache, we have, you know, the get by ID, get children, get by XPath, get by route. However, we don't have access to things like save, get versions, get previous versions, all of that sort of stuff. And this makes sense. iPublished content is always working with the latest version in that Umbraco cache. So you have no access to the previous versions. And if you're building normal websites, perfect, who cares? We don't need to do, like, who cares about looking at previous versions? We don't need to query the database for real-time stuff. We're going to use that cache. So when you're building websites, really key that you're always working with iPublished content. And if you start working with iContent and you're not building a backend plugin or doing something specific to warrant using iContent, you want to refactor your code. Now, it's also worth mentioning that there's different ways of accessing the front-end cache and accessing these iPublished content items. So as you can see here, we're using iUmbraco context accessor, bit of a mouthful. Now, there's also possible to use this iUmbraco context factory. So this is going to basically give you access to the same thing, just doing it in a slightly different approach. So as you can see here, we've got Umbraco context factory. This is going to give us access to the ensure Umbraco context, which is going to give us access to this reference. And from here we can do the dot. I think we've got access to Umbraco context. Then we can access content, where the contents of the front-end cache is available. And then from here we've got our get by ID, get by routes, get by XPath, get content type. So as you can see, there's a few different ways of accessing iPublish content. However, the important thing to keep in your head is that when you're creating backend plugins or you need to update content, it's the same mantra, I've probably said it about 20 times now, is you need to use iContent and that iContent service. The last point that I'd like to get across before we wrap up is just do a quick compare and contrast about the different properties and methods which are available between iContent and iPublish content. So, very simple demo, you can knock this up yourself. Create two types, one of iContent, one of iPublish content, and let's see what IntelliSense returns. So with our content, straight away we can see that we've got some stuff like clear publishing information. One really useful one is content schedule, and from here you'll be able to get the schedule date for some content or the expiry date. So when we come to create that backend plugin in a minute, in the future video, this is going to be kind of key for us because we can figure out the scheduled dates. Now, we've also got access to loads of other useful things in here. So we've got things like is dirty. There's also, was dirty. In our heads, we've all got the same joke. It's too easy, so I'm not going to go there. But as you can see, we've got stuff like the date it was deleted. We've got options to do deep cloning. We can dispose of change tracking. We can get previous versions. We can get information if it's been published, that sort of stuff. Now, if we look on this and we type in URL, you'll notice that the iContent doesn't have a direct property in order for you to get the friendly URL that's going to be rendered on the website. So we can get this get URL segment, which is kind of different. However, this is because when we're working with content, it might be saved, it might be scheduled, it might not be published. Now, another one which actually is handy to know about is trashed. So this property you can use to tell if a content editor has actually deleted the content and it's living in the recycle bin. So yeah, content. Now we've also got published content. So published content is very different, and as soon as we look at it, you're basically going to see a load of presentational style sort of methods and properties. So straight away you can see we've got things like get the ancestor. We've got access to get breadcrumbs or get children. So all of these are basically methods and properties, which is basically going to help you present your page data easily. So these are presentational style concerns. I mean, you notice in the iContent, we didn't have things like get a breadcrumb. Now, if we do URL, you can see that we have direct access to get the friendly URL from the iPublish content, which makes sense because everything which is iPublish is published content, and you get the gist of it. We can also do things like get media URL. So there's get grid HTML, convert to HTML, get the culture for the domain. So all the properties and methods which are focused in iPublish content are basically there to help you make your presentation and HTML writing that much easier. So hopefully by now you should get the difference between these two things. If you're wanting to do presentational, get content from Umbraco, render it in an HTML view, you want iPublish content because it's going to have all the methods and properties designed to make your life as easy as possible. Now, if you want to do admin tasks, update, schedule information, schedule publishing, write content, look at previous versions of content, stuff that you wouldn't really do on your web pages per se, this is when you're going to be looking at iContent, and it's going to give you all the properties and methods which are going to allow you to do those types of operations. And that concludes the end of another video. So I'm hoping you found that educational and you got something out of it. So if you found value in this video, please hit the like button. When you hit like, it just basically allows me to know what size of content I should focus on. So if you want me to do more Umbraco content, hit like. So yeah, as I was saying, I hope you gained something from that video. If you want me to do a video on a particular topic, please leave a comment below. I do read all the comments. Also, if you want to do me an absolute solid, and if you want to learn more about Umbraco, CMS General, basically stuff that's going to make you a better developer, hit the subscribe button because that would make my day and it'd make you an absolute legend. Now, other things you can do to help me out if you really want to is you can sign up to my newsletter, link below. You're going to get a weekly newsletter on a Sunday, which gives you some industry news. It's not really spam. You can unsubscribe if you want to. Super simple. Also, my Umbraco V9 book is coming out. Look on LeanPub for the pre-release. So if you want to support me and give me some motivation to carry on writing a book on Umbraco V9, yeah, look out for that and buy a pre-edition copy. It'll be £5, and when it's actually released and finished, it'll be like 15 quid. So you can get a cheap version now and download the proper version later on in a few months' time. Anyway, hope you've got some value from this video. Hope you're having that amazing day wherever you are in the world, and happy coding.